So, thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to be able to present the first DMP, Drought Management Plan for Sweden, because it's also a result of a long work, but also now formally decided last week in Sweden. So it's kind of a first talk I do about this. And as I was presented as, I'm the director in the South Baltic Authority, and we are located in Kalmar, southeastern Sweden. There will come maps in the presentation later on. I hope you can imagine where we are in the geography. And actually we are experiencing is now the same things, that we have reports from all over Europe, China, US about decreasing levels in rivers, lakes, and also groundwater. It's a drought also in Sweden. Actually, that's hard for some Swedes to grasp, because we have a lot of water in Sweden. We don't have problems. We don't need to think about those things. Those are the ideas in people's mind often. Of course, some people realize the importance of the questions, but many doesn't. So it's kind of a rethinking that needs to be done in Sweden. And if you look at the picture, that is from this summer, in one of our bigger rivers in the water district. So you can imagine which kind of low levels we have. So it's not kind of, you have measured 30 centimeters decrease. It's a real thing, actually. And therefore, in the South Baltic district, we have worked with the issues actually during several years, but now we have a plan that could formally be implemented. And the background is that we have a situation, the natural situation in southeast Sweden is that we have very low precipitation, ranging between 500 and 700 millimeters a year. And that should be added that the evaporation in the same area is at least 400 millimeters per year. So then you see what we have to handle, not much water. And of course we have had recurrent supply problems, at least since 2015. They have been more or less acute. But if you are here with older people, it has, of course, occurred in many, many years back. And we also have a supply of surface water, at least partly, for both drinking water, agriculture, and industries. And surface water is more sensitive for drought. And of course, the European Commission, they says that Sweden should produce such a plan if we have the problem. We cannot report problems and not have a plan. And the work was mainly done in 20 and 21 with support from several actors, the Swedish Marine and Water Agency, SGU, Geological Surveillance Agency, or whatever you call you in English, and also the SMHI, the Meteorological Agency in Sweden. So we have had a lot of support and discussions. And during the process, we identified roughly 19 water bodies where water abstraction was a distinct risk factor. So it's actually the pressure that is going on in those water bodies. And we had suggestions out for 6 months of public consultation. And when we talk about this, we have some expectations, of course, what to achieve with this plan. And we hope that it will contribute to minimize the negative effects generally, both from drought, and there you should think lower precipitation, both rain and snow, and water shortage. Because water shortage is another dimension. It's when you consume more water than it's available. So both those dimensions should be stressed in the plan. We hope that we can contribute to prevent negative impact on the ecology, the ecosystems, ecosystem services, and also protected species and protected biotopes. So those could also be threatened in those occasions, but also the public services. And it could include, of course, drinking water, but also other water supply for public institutions. Food production, agriculture, and not to forget the food industry. Those are dependent on clean water and often big amounts of water for both cleaning the industries and including the water in the process. And of course, economy in general, other kind of businesses using water. And then we thought that we should be able to define those environmental quality standards, EQS, for both surface water and groundwater in this area where we identify this water abstractions pressure. And those should be, of course, used by authorities and courts in permission or other kind of situations. We think also that we can support long-term planning by identifying important measures. And of course, if all this could be fulfilled, there would be a less requirement of crisis management, need of emergency water, irrigation bans, restriction in abstractions, and so on. So if we can reach all this, I don't know, but we have the plan to deliver something that could reach those goals. And as I said in the beginning, the natural conditions are important. In the South Baltic district, as you see on the map, there are a lot of small groundwater bodies, and of course, if they are small, they have a limited amount of water available to use. And in this map, on your left, the redder, the less water available. So then you can see how the district looks like. And also, and if we look at the drought period, and those are registered data, and it's an average days per year from 1971 to 2000. So they are a bit old, maybe, the data, but the pattern is there. And the more dark brown, the longer period of drought. And the darkest brown areas in this map is around Kalmar and the coast, and the number of days that could be defined as drought in these areas are 170 days a year. So it says something about the amplitude of the problem. And of course, with that kind of natural conditions, the climate change will amplify all the risks. Of course, we heard it today, and I can just repeat that what we are seeing is those things. Higher temperature and longer vegetation period means more evaporation. So those 400 millimeters I said before maybe will increase to 450 in the nearest years. And also too high temperatures, we have learned that they could also cause problems because they can be too high for producing drinking water. You shouldn't exceed 25 degrees if you produce drinking water. And sometimes the source is warmer than that. And also, as we have heard in the news during this summer, cooling water for industrial use and energy production is also a risk factor. But also faster microbial growth. Different bacteria or algae will decrease quality of water. But also we have, during a drought period, risks of very intense rain in some events. And those will cause flooding and runoff of nutrients or other unwanted substances. So that's also quality questions. And of course, flooding can be a big problem. It's not that frequent in our district, but more in others. So flooding is also a factor to consider. But also a drought event during summer will cause a bigger demand. Of course, the agriculture will have more demand of irrigation water, but also cooling in industries and maybe also cooling in other areas. So water is used more and more when the climate will change with higher temperatures. And the rising sea level, with the long coast that we have in the district, we will also see risks for salt intrusion in the coastal areas. And that could give risks in agriculture, but also in drinking water supply. And when we have higher temperatures, we will have less amount of snow. And during winter and autumn, the refilling of groundwater is not sufficient. And maybe a lot more if we go in details here. But that's a big challenge for us in the water district. And I have actually tried to lift those issues also within the Swedish National Expert Council for Climate Adaptation, where I also work, so that the water questions and climate questions will merge as possible. So what to expect in the future? To understand the future better, the SMHI, Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, has helped us with the modeling. And this map, I have several more, this shows the flow endurance during summer drought. If there is no rain, how long will the water in the river sustain? I hope you understand what I mean here. And this is maybe called a natural buffer capacity. Water comes from groundwater, water comes from lakes and the system. And if you go in more detail and the bigger scenes that we have seen before, you can see that there is a scattered pattern. So the analysis is done in a more geographically detailed scale here. And the redder, it's just 1 or 2 months that the water will sustain, and the blue more than 15. So this is also kind of a picture what to expect. And to see those variation within the geography is also interesting. And I try to see if I can use this one. You see there is a blue area here, almost blue. And this is the river Emon. And in this river we have a lot of problems this summer. So if we model just the natural conditions without the water abstraction, we could see this picture. If we should add the water abstraction, it's a totally different one. So that's also an experience that we have done during this work. And as I said before, the risk assessment of the quantitative status, we identified 81 groundwater bodies and 10 surface water bodies. And I must admit that it's not easy to see in the map, but you can see where the red areas is, and that's groundwater bodies here. But this is the proportion between groundwater and surface water, and that is also a tricky question for us because we don't have good enough methods for the surface water. So, what to do? Yes, we have a brand new program of measures, and we give measures for the national authorities, mostly in guidance and advising how to effective water use, how to inspect abstraction, how to do this in agriculture. Then we have the Board of Agriculture. So all those things we hope should contribute. And also to keep more water on land is an issue. And then we'll have guidance how to use wetlands more efficiently and how to decrease the drainage of the land. So here is some of those measures. And I have said those before, I think, the challenges. It's hard to see which time perspective and scenarios of climate change you should include in the risk assessment. And the quantitative status in surface water must be easier to define. And the monitoring of water abstraction is not so well developed in Sweden. We have permissions, but the data rendering from that should be reported, but it's a very variation in the quality of this. And small and medium-sized abstraction are almost not reported at all. And the private water supply is maybe also in that category. So it's hard to calculate satisfying water balances. And the increasing demand of public water we can see as a risk later on. More and more small businesses want to connect to the public system. So many more suggestions and ideas came from during consultation, and we have gathered those in a special report where you can find on which you can find on our webpage. It's in Swedish, and maybe you can read Swedish even if you don't talk it. So there are a lot of ideas for the future work. And I have the summary. I have said all those things before, but if you take the presentation later on, then you can read them again. So there, I thank you.